There's a figure in the Bible who disappears almost as quickly as he arrives. No battles, no great speeches, no dramatic fall from grace. Just a line, so quiet it almost vanishes beneath the weight of more famous stories. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. That's it. No death, no burial, just gone, taken. But taken where? And by whom? What does it mean to be taken by God? And why Enoch of all people? Tonight, we are not climbing towers. We're stepping into the clouds, into something older and stranger than it first appears. Because some believe that Enoch wasn't just taken to heaven, but somewhere else. Some believe he didn't just ascend. He was abducted, lifted through a portal, removed from Earth to witness something most eyes never see. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it there? Are you wrapped in blankets as the night deepens, or letting the day fade quietly around you? I love knowing how far these stories stretch. Now, find a quiet space, take a deep breath, and let's drift into one of the most mysterious vanishings in all of sacred history. Let's wonder together. Did Enoch get taken by God? Or was there something more? Long before the flood waters swallowed the world, before Noah built the ark, before giants roamed the earth and watchers descended from the heavens, there was a man who walked with God. His name was Enoch. We are told little of him. No dramatic storylines, no epic battles, no burning bushes. Only that he lived, that he pleased God, and that after 365 years, he vanished. He was not, for God took him. In a book full of genealogies that end in death, and he died, and he died, and he died, Enoch's story breaks the rhythm. It interrupts the pattern. It opens a door. Because what does it mean to be taken? The Hebrew word is lakach, to seize, to fetch, to carry away. It is not the language of soft fading. It is the language of action, of movement, of removal. And here the mystery begins. Because every other figure in the early Genesis lineages lives, dies, and is buried. But not Enoch. He is lifted, removed, transferred into some other state, and this alone would be enough to stir curiosity. But then, there's more. Because Enoch is not just mentioned in Genesis. He's expanded in apocryphal texts, especially the Book of Enoch, a collection so startling, so cosmic, it was buried for centuries and banned from the biblical canon. And in that book, Enoch doesn't just walk with God. He is taken to other realms, shown the inner workings of heaven, given visions of judgment, of angels, of otherworldly technology, of fallen beings who once descended to earth. He becomes not just a man, but a messenger, a traveler between dimensions, a scribe of heaven. And that is when the question shifts. Was Enoch simply favored? Or was he chosen? Was he taken because he was holy? Or because he was useful? Was he removed from earth as a reward? Or as a mission? There are echoes here, strange ones. The language of being taken up, of being shown wheels within wheels, of ascending through layers of reality. Later, the prophet Elijah would also be taken, in a chariot of fire, a whirlwind lifting him from the earth. And in Revelation, John is told, "Come up here," and he too is shown the mysteries of heaven. The pattern emerges. Some are called upward not to die, but to see, to witness, to return changed. But Enoch never returned, at least not to us. And this is where the story stretches beyond the familiar and begins to hum with something ancient, something vast, because in the book of Enoch, we are told that he was shown the order of the cosmos, the names of the stars, the prisons of the watchers, the secrets of time, the machinery of judgment. He was taken not to rest, but to understand. And what he saw was not soft or sweet. It was terrifying, majestic, cosmic, strange. It was not the heaven of golden gates. It was something older, bigger, more ancient than even our imagination. And so we ask again, did Enoch ascend into paradise? Or was he escorted into a different kind of realm? Was he welcomed into light or briefed for a mission? Was he abducted? And if so, by what? By whom? And for what purpose? To walk with God is one thing. To vanish from the earth is another. And yet that is all the Genesis text gives us. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. The verse arrives like a whisper between verses of long lives and long deaths. No thunder, no spectacle, just absence. A quiet removal that echoes louder the longer we sit with it. It's almost as if the text itself holds its breath, as if something too immense to explain is being said with as few words as possible. And maybe that's because the truth, if spoken in full, would shake the foundations of how we understand the heavens. Because Enoch is not just missing, he's moved. And in later texts, we're told where. The book of Enoch opens the gate. And once that gate is opened, we are no longer standing in the dust of Genesis. We are drifting into a world of watchers and stars that sing, of fallen ones imprisoned beneath mountains, of realms layered like invisible veils above our own. And at the center of it is Enoch, no longer just a man, but a mediator. He is shown the secrets of heaven, not metaphorical ones, but mechanical. Movements of the sun and moon that are described with geometric precision, celestial chambers where time itself is governed, vaults where winds are stored, mountains that hum with energy, places where angels fall and are judged and bound. Enoch becomes a cosmic scribe, not because he sought it, but because he was taken. And what's most haunting is that his journey mirrors stories we now label something else entirely. Because what do we call it when a being is removed from Earth by a force from the sky, shown technology and knowledge beyond comprehension, and returned, or not returned, transformed? In our modern language, we call it abduction, close encounter, missing time, alien intervention. But in ancient language, it was often divine, holy, taken by God. Are we describing the same thing in different tongues? Is Enoch's ascension a sacred version of what others have whispered in more recent centuries, being lifted, shown, altered? Perhaps this is why the book of Enoch was hidden for so long, why it was excluded from the canon. Because it says too much, because it doesn't sit quietly in the realm of metaphor. It bleeds into mystery, into mechanics, into realms that feel more like physics than parable. And what makes it even stranger is that this book was once cherished. The early church fathers referenced it. Ancient communities revered it. Even the writer of the New Testament letter Jude quotes it directly, referencing Enoch's vision of the Lord coming with 10,000 of his holy ones. It was not fringe, it was foundational, until it wasn't, until it was buried, lost, and when it was found again, thousands of years later, preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition and rediscovered in caves and fragments, it pulsed with energy. Because here, finally, was the rest of the story. And it was not soft, it was cosmic. Enoch, we are told, was shown the realm of Uriel, Raphael, Raguel, Michael. He was taken through veils of heaven, into regions where fallen angels were bound for teaching forbidden knowledge to mankind. Weaponry, enchantments, root cuttings, seduction, astrology. Knowledge that changed the earth, that corrupted it. And it was Enoch who was made to witness their punishment, who was shown the trembling mountains where they wait for judgment, who walked with angels who seemed less like men with wings and more like intelligences clothed in light, geometry, and sound. It is difficult to read these descriptions and not hear the echoes of what modern experiences describe. Beings not bound by time, communication without speech, crafts that move without propulsion. And so, we must ask again, was Enoch taken to heaven or to something else? Was he abducted? Was he chosen for an encounter because he could comprehend what others could not? Or because he was uniquely sensitive to the presence that watches from beyond? Perhaps the line between angel and other is thinner than we thought. Perhaps Enoch's story bridges that gap, not to diminish the sacred, but to reveal how vast it truly is. To remind us that heaven may not look like clouds and harps, that it may look instead like thunder inside crystal, like voices that sound like rushing waters, like energy too bright to name, and that Enoch, gentle and faithful, was not just taken to rest, but to witness it all, and to write it down for a future generation, perhaps for us. If Enoch had simply disappeared, his story might have faded quietly into the margins of biblical mystery. But the deeper we read into the ancient texts that bear his name, the more we realize he did not disappear. He was sent. The removal of Enoch from the earth was not an escape. It was an assignment. He was taken, yes, but not to be hidden, to be shown, to be taught, to record. He was brought into realms most humans are never allowed to see. And what he saw was not the soft serenity we often associate with heaven. It was structured, layered, living, and terrifying. It was machinery and judgment and sound. And it all begins with the Watchers. The book of Enoch tells us that long ago, 200 angels descended to the earth. They were called the Watchers, assigned to observe, to guard, to oversee. But they broke the boundary. They took human women. They taught forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, enchantments, astrology, root working, the manipulation of nature, the weapons of war. And their offspring were giants, Nephilim, creatures of immense size and violence that began to devour the earth. The world began to groan under the weight of knowledge it wasn't meant to bear. And it was in the middle of this chaos, before the flood, before the cleansing, that Enoch was taken and shown everything. He did not ask to go. He was chosen. And it was not just the heavens that he saw. He was brought to the places where the fallen were imprisoned, to dark, silent spaces beneath mountains, to eternal prisons sealed in flame and stone. He was shown where time itself bends, where stars are judged, where angels fear to tread. He was brought into the council of the divine. He was told to write what he saw. He became a recorder, not for his own generation, but for a future one. For the days, the book says, when mankind would once again begin to rise in pride, to misuse knowledge, to break the sacred boundaries, for the generation when the Watcher's forbidden teachings would resurface. And suddenly, the story no longer feels ancient. It feels current, because we live in a time when we manipulate nature, when we reach for knowledge that bends life itself, when we move particles faster than light, split the fabric of space, decode the genetic code, speak with artificial minds, and stack data so vast it rivals the stars. We live in the return of the Watcher's age, the age Enoch was shown, and perhaps that is why his writings return now, hidden for centuries, buried and forbidden, now suddenly found, translated, shared. Enoch's voice rises again, not with preaching, but with warning, with memory, with revelation. He was not abducted as punishment. He was chosen because he could see without turning away, because he could witness the heavens and still return whole, or mostly whole, because it is unclear if Enoch ever fully came back. Some say he became the angel Metatron, scribe of God, voice like a trumpet, presence like a whirlwind. Others say he still walks in higher realms, waiting for the moment he will return with judgment in hand. In either case, his role was never to rest. It was to warn, to testify, to speak of a place too large for words, to remind us that heaven is not distant, it is layered, it is near, and it is listening, and that those who are taken are not always gone. Some are working in places unseen, some are still writing, some are still watching, and some, like Enoch, have already seen what happens when forbidden knowledge spreads too far, too fast. Perhaps that's why he was taken, not to protect him, but to prepare us. There is a moment in the book of Enoch when the Watchers, those once glorious beings who descended and fell, turn to Enoch for help. They plead with him to intercede, to write a petition on their behalf and deliver it to the Most High. These beings, ancient and mighty, bound now in shadow, beg a man, one man, to be their voice. It is staggering, and it tells us something critical, that Enoch was not just a visitor to the unseen realms. He was trusted, he had access. He was not only shown the mysteries, he became part of them. The Watchers knew this. They had broken the laws of heaven, and now they feared the judgment they helped unleash. And so, they reached out, not upward, but sideways, toward Enoch, toward the one who walked with God, the one who had been taken. And this moment, quiet in the text but thunderous in meaning, reveals the depth of Enoch's role. He is a mediator, a scribe, a bridge, but also something else, something almost judicial. Because Enoch does not simply deliver the petition. He is brought back before the Most High and shown why the petition will not be granted. He is made to stand within the throne room of divine justice, to see the sentences passed, to understand the weight of rebellion. He sees the Watcher's fate sealed, cast into chains, buried beneath mountains, never again to rise. And it is Enoch who carries that message back to them. Enoch, mortal, finite, becomes the bearer of eternal judgment, and they tremble before him. They weep, and still he does not turn away. What kind of man is this? What does it take to be shown the mechanics of judgment, the trembling of angels, the laws that govern stars, and still remain whole, still speak, still return? The answer may be hidden in how Enoch was taken. It was not a beam of light, not a chariot of fire. It was a walking, a continual presence with the divine until the distance between realms dissolved, until his body no longer belonged here, until the world could not hold him, until the veil welcomed him in. But that veil, once opened, does not forget, and Enoch's access, his role, was not erased. It was expanded. In the mysteries of Jewish mysticism, he becomes Metatron, the angelic scribe whose voice shakes the firmament, whose name is written with the same letters as the divine, the only human, they say, allowed to sit beside the throne, the one who records all things. If this is true, then Enoch was not simply taken to witness the past. He was placed in position to oversee the future, to observe what unfolds when mankind returns to the patterns of the Watchers, when forbidden knowledge rises again. And here, the story reaches us. Because we are no longer simply discovering technology, we are accelerating. We split atoms, edit genes, speak with machines that mimic our minds. We unlock ancient codes in DNA, harness power from invisible particles, build neural networks that learn faster than we can teach. And all the while, we forget how this has happened before. Enoch saw it, saw how knowledge, untempered by wisdom, tore creation apart, how the Watchers meant to help, but corrupted instead. And now, it seems, we approach the same cliff. Only this time, there are no mountains to imprison us, no chains of fire to stop the spread, only the quiet voice of a man taken long ago, a man who walked with God and was not, but whose message somehow still lingers, still calls, still warns. And maybe that's the point. Maybe Enoch was not abducted, but preserved, removed so that his message would outlast the flood, outlast the fire, outlast the forgetting. Maybe Enoch was taken so that when humanity once again danced too close to the veil, his voice would return, whispering through lost texts and ancient scrolls and digital screens, reminding us that what we call progress was once called rebellion, that what we celebrate was once judged, and that what we're building looks very familiar. To understand why Enoch was taken, we must understand what he was taken into. The scriptures speak of heaven as if it is a single place, but Enoch's writings paint a very different picture, one of layers, chambers, thresholds. He describes being taken through multiple heavens, each more radiant, more terrifying than the last. He sees foundations of crystal, thrones made of fire, beings so vast and unfamiliar that the human tongue fails to describe them. And yet he continues forward. He is not consumed. He is not broken. He is taught. And that alone sets him apart, because even the greatest prophets feared the divine presence. Moses hid his face. Isaiah trembled at the sight of holy fire. Ezekiel collapsed when the heavens opened. But Enoch walked, not with arrogance but with alignment. He was calibrated to something most never glimpse. And perhaps that is why he was chosen, because Enoch was not trying to take. He was trying to understand. He did not seek power, he sought order, meaning, harmony. And so the veil lifted for him. And what he saw there was not chaos, but structure, not whim, but law. He saw stars that moved by command. He saw winds stored in treasuries. He saw watchers assigned to regions of the sky, to gates of light and darkness, to seasons and signs. The universe to Enoch was not random. It was designed, measured, and governed. And this is where the horror of the Watcher's fall comes into focus. Because they knew this order. They were part of it, and they broke it. They crossed the boundary between what was permitted and what was withheld. They gave mankind knowledge that was powerful, yes, but also incomplete. They offered tools without ethics, power without wisdom, insight without reverence, and mankind, unable to bear the weight of what was given, twisted it, turned metallurgy into war, turned beauty into seduction, turned the mysteries of creation into manipulation, and the earth cried out, not just in pain, but in distortion. Nature rebelled. Blood cried from the soil. Giants ravaged the land. And heaven responded, first with warning, then with judgment. And in the center of it all stood Enoch, watching, writing, delivering messages no one wanted to hear. He was the one trusted with secrets because he did not seek to control them. He was the one allowed to witness the inner scaffolding of reality because he would not exploit it. And this may be the most overlooked truth of Enoch's story, that knowledge is sacred only when approached with humility. The Watchers gave knowledge without transformation. Enoch was transformed before he received it, and that difference changed everything, because what he saw did not puff him up. It broke him open. He wept, he trembled, he worshipped, and he wrote, for us. The Book of Enoch is not just a record of visions, it is a warning encoded in sacred awe. A message from a man who stood within the engine of the cosmos and returned, if only through words, to tell us how thin the veil really is. And that is what we forget, that the boundary between here and there, between now and eternity, between what we see and what waits beyond, is not made of distance. It's made of resonance. The veil does not lift for the curious. It lifts for the consecrated. And Enoch was consecrated by his walk, by his obedience, by his refusal to exploit what he was shown. That is why he was taken, not as escape, but as access, not as reward, but as responsibility. And now, as humanity draws near once again to ancient knowledge, technologies and ideas that echo the forbidden days before the flood, the presence of Enoch rises again. His words return, his warning sharpens, because what we are building, genetic keys, intelligent machines, synthetic life, is not new, it is old, and it is incomplete. And if we do not approach it like Enoch, with reverence, with trembling, with surrender, then we risk becoming like the Watchers, fallen not in descent, but in direction, not because we reached for the heavens, but because we forgot how to walk with the one who made them. The story of Enoch begins almost unnoticed, just a few lines buried deep in the genealogies of Genesis. In a world where lifespans stretch across centuries, where men live and die and return to the dust, Enoch's story breaks the pattern not with noise, but with silence. He lived 365 years, it says, far fewer than those before or after. But something else happened. He walked with God. And then, he was not, for God took him. The phrase "he was not" is haunting. It implies absence but not death, vanishing but not ending, a removal, not an erasure. Something took place, something final yet mysterious, and that mystery is rippled forward for thousands of years. Because Enoch's story is one of transformation so complete that the natural world could no longer hold him. He disappeared, not in violence, not in rebellion, but in presence. He walked with God so closely that at some point the veil dissolved and he stepped through, not by force, not by storm, but by proximity. The story of Enoch stands in deliberate contrast to so many others. Adam fell, Cain fled, Lamech killed. Even Noah, righteous as he was, found himself drunk and exposed. But Enoch simply walked, quiet, steady, unremarkable until he wasn't, until he became the exception, the anomaly, the man who did not die. And that single difference is why his story reverberates like a sacred question. What does it mean to live in such alignment that you no longer decay? What does it mean to be so tuned to the presence of God that your body begins to respond differently to time, to matter, to separation? Perhaps Enoch's removal was not an abduction, but a shift, a reabsorption into a realm he already belonged to, a return to a frequency he had never left. If so, his story is not one of escape. It is one of revelation, a reminder that ascension is not a reward for the dead, but a path for the living, that we are not merely waiting to be taken, but called to walk in such harmony that the veil becomes porous. But we live in an age that has forgotten how to walk. We run, we grasp, we accelerate, we download, we build, we consume. The Watchers fell for similar reasons. They descended not out of humility, but curiosity untethered from reverence. They gave knowledge not to elevate, but to manipulate. They saw beauty, and they possessed it. They saw weakness, and they exploited it. Enoch, by contrast, saw the same realms and stood in awe. He was shown the secrets of the stars, the rotation of the heavens, the architecture of the throne, and instead of turning those insights into control, he turned them into worship, into wisdom, into witness. And perhaps that is why he alone was taken, not with chains, not in fire, but in the gentlest, most unexplainable of vanishings, because God knew he could be trusted with what he had seen. This is why the book of Enoch carries such weight, even now. It's not a tale of speculation. It's a record of sacred exposure. A man shown what the rest of us are not ready to hold. And maybe that's why his voice re-emerges now. Because the age we live in is starting to reach again for the same forbidden fruit. We push at the boundaries of the human. We remake the body. We edit the embryo. We teach machines to think, to feel, to imitate the soul. And we do so with ambition, with wonder, with brilliance, but often without reverence, without caution, without pause. And in that rush, we begin to repeat the Watcher's pattern. We ascend, yes, but not like Enoch. We ascend like those who fell. And so, his story rises again, like a signal from the past, like a frequency long buried, now humming through our age. Not to stop us, but to steady us, to remind us that there is another way, a slower way, a sacred way, the way of walking, not running, of listening, not grabbing, of being taken, not because we forced the heavens to open, but because we became the kind of soul they could welcome in. Time, in most sacred stories, is a river, steady, constant, irresistible. We are born into its current and carried downstream, our days counted like stones. But Enoch's story bends that current. It suggests that time is not fixed, that some can step outside of it, not by conquering death, but by slipping into another rhythm, a divine rhythm, a different resonance. The scriptures say Enoch lived 365 years, and then he was not. The number is not random, 365, the number of days in a solar year, a complete cycle, a full circle, as though his life was a calendar unto itself, an earthly mirror of heavenly time. It's subtle, but it matters, because Enoch doesn't just vanish. He completes something. He finishes a pattern, and then the pattern lifts him. We do not know what Enoch looked like. We do not know how he spoke, but we know this: he walked with God, which is to say, he synchronized, he harmonized, he moved in step with something eternal, and that movement seems to have unlocked a gate, not because God reached down to snatch him, but because he had already drawn near. The distance dissolved, the veil opened, and he walked through. But the walk was not one of escape. It was one of trust, because what happens next in the texts is remarkable. Enoch does not vanish into silence. He becomes a scribe, a witness, a messenger between worlds, and the first thing he is shown is not paradise, it is judgment. The Watchers, their punishment, their tears, their fear. It is as if the heavens themselves need a human voice, someone who understands sorrow, choice, and redemption, someone who can speak to both sides of the veil. And they choose Enoch, not Noah, not Methuselah, not a king or a prophet. Enoch, a quiet man, a walker. And this may be the most important part of his story. God trusted him with vision, with language, with access, with secrets. And that trust was not based on might or intelligence. It was based on alignment, on presence, on humility. Enoch became in some way the blueprint for divine trust. And it is worth asking, what would that kind of trust look like now? If we were to be shown the machinery of heaven today, would we tremble? Would we listen? Would we write it down, not to exploit it, but to prepare others? Or would we attempt to bend it, digitize it, turn it into advantage? The Watchers fell because they crossed the line between knowledge and power. Enoch was lifted because he refused to cross that line. He received the vision not as leverage, but as burden, and he carried it with dignity. This is rare, and that rarity echoes through time. Enoch's name disappears from the canon for thousands of years, but he re-emerges at the end. In the book of Jude, quoted directly, as the one who foretells the Lord coming with 10,000 holy ones to execute justice. He is no longer just the man who vanished. He is now the prophet of the return, the one who saw what is coming and warned those who would listen. His voice bookends time, Genesis to Revelation, first veil to final unveiling. And maybe that's why his disappearance is so powerful, because it wasn't an ending. It was a pause, a placement, a repositioning of his presence. He went behind the curtain, into the control room of reality, not to escape the earth, but to prepare for its reckoning. And if that is true, if Enoch still watches, still writes, then his gaze is upon us now, as we build, as we blend the human and the machine, as we speak with artificial minds and decode the structure of matter, as we tamper again with creation, again with language, again with the boundary between what is permitted and what is sacred. He sees. And perhaps, he writes, perhaps the book of Enoch is not finished. Perhaps it is still being written. And we, without realizing, are living the next chapter. Light is often used as a metaphor in sacred texts. Light as wisdom, as clarity, as divine presence. But in Enoch's story, light is not just metaphor. It's architecture. He's shown palaces of crystal and flame, beings cloaked in brightness too intense for eyes to hold, thrones that pulse with light like living stars. The inner realm he enters is not abstract. It is luminous, structured, ordered, alive. And as he walks through these layers, he describes a reality that is not built on matter but on frequency. He sees time as a flowing structure, seasons as forces assigned by watchers, the sun and moon moving through heavenly gates, not randomly, but precisely. It is as if Enoch is being shown the scaffolding behind creation, the control panel, the cosmic code. And what is most astonishing is not that he sees it, it's that he survives it. He does not fall apart. He does not shatter in the presence of such glory. He walks through it, guided, unburned, unshaken. And that tells us something. He was already aligned. His frequency matched. His walk with God was not a poetic phrase. It was literal resonance. And so when he entered the higher realms, they recognized him. He belonged. This is what makes Enoch's experience so different from modern stories of abduction or contact. He is not overwhelmed. He is not disoriented. He is not paralyzed. He is clear, focused, present. He records what he sees. He speaks with beings of fire and is not consumed. He hears the voices of stars and writes them down. He walks into the throne room itself and receives instruction. This is not the reaction of someone intruding where they do not belong. This is the response of someone expected, welcomed. And so the word abduction begins to feel too small, too coarse, too distorted. What Enoch experienced was not extraction, it was invitation, initiation. He was taken, yes, but only because he had already arrived. His walk had already crossed the veil, and the veil, recognizing one of its own, opened. What would it mean to live that way now? To be so present, so clean in our intent, so quiet in our striving, that heaven opens not in violence, but in embrace. What if the portal is not found in sky or stone, but in attention, in devotion, in the steadiness of our daily walk? This is Enoch's gift. He reminds us that access is not granted by force. It is offered through alignment. The watchers descended in power. Enoch ascended in peace. And the difference is everything. One brought ruin. The other brought revelation. We live in an age obsessed with light, but often in the wrong way. Artificial light. Screens that dazzle but do not illumine. Data that blinds but does not clarify. We seek knowledge, but rarely wisdom, vision, but not presence. And so, despite all we have built, the veil remains closed, because the key is not in power, it is in purity. The light Enoch saw was not technological, it was sacred. And that kind of light cannot be accessed through invention. It must be received through transformation, through walking, through quietness, through reverence. Enoch's life was not extraordinary because of what he saw. It was extraordinary because of how he lived before he saw it. The visions were not a reward. They were the natural extension of a life already aligned. And this is the path still open to us. Not through towers or telescopes or machines, but through the heart, through the soul, through the silent turning of our attention toward the eternal. That is how the veil thins. That is how the gate opens. And that is why Enoch was taken. Not because he demanded it, but because he became the kind of presence heaven could not resist drawing in. There is a difference between being shown and being allowed to see. One is granted from the outside, a gift, a vision, a sudden flash of light. The other rises from within, earned not by striving, but by surrender. Enoch's journey was not one of being dragged into the mysteries. He was ready. He was already walking in rhythm with the unseen. His life was a long alignment, and when the time came, the veil did not need to be torn. It simply opened. We chase visions today. We seek knowledge, revelation, secrets of the cosmos. We build machines to scan the stars, to listen for signals, to peer into particles so small they slip through space itself. But Enoch teaches us something counterintuitive, that the deepest access doesn't come through acceleration. It comes through harmony. That the gate we seek is not hidden in the sky, but in the posture of the soul. He did not ask for access. He became it. And this is why Enoch's abduction story feels so different from every other removal narrative in spiritual or extraterrestrial lore. There is no struggle, no confusion, no trauma, only continuity. One moment he walks the earth, and the next, he walks the heavens. It is the same step, the same rhythm, as if reality simply shifted around him to reflect who he had already become. This is not mythology. This is invitation, because it suggests that the door still exists, that the frequency still waits, that heaven is not locked, but calibrated, and we, in our frenzy to invent, to ascend, to transcend, often forget to prepare. The Watchers had power, but no purity. Their knowledge lacked submission. Their descent was unauthorized. They forced access, and the result was disorder. But Enoch was granted access because he was already aligned. The difference between being pulled into the heavens and being received by them is everything. And it's here that we must pause and ask the deeper question. Are we preparing to be shown, or merely demanding to see? The modern world has no shortage of data, no shortage of theories, no shortage of voices that claim access to the hidden things, but the test of sacred knowledge has never been brilliance. It has always been humility. The Watchers were brilliant. Enoch was surrendered. And that is why he saw further. Why he stood in the courts of heaven while the others were sealed in darkness. It's not that Enoch was better. It's that he was empty. He did not ascend to gain power. He walked upward because the weight of his presence had become too light for gravity. And the heavens, recognizing one of their own, took him. Not as an anomaly, but as a prototype. Enoch is not the exception. He is the preview of what happens when a soul harmonizes with divine presence so fully that boundaries bend and reality opens. And this is why his story remains, why it could not be buried, why his book returns now in an age that races toward knowledge but forgets the soul. Because his path is still open, his walk is still possible, not through ritual or striving or complexity, but through surrender, through purity, through the long, slow shaping of a life that no longer clings to the dust. The ones who will walk into the heavens are not the ones who demand answers. They are the ones who have learned to become the question, who have stopped forcing and started listening, who do not break the veil, but breathe with it, like Enoch did, and still does. We live in an age of great reaching. We stretch our minds into algorithms and artificial learning. We stretch our eyes through telescopes that peer into galaxies so old their light is barely catching up. We stretch our hands into machines, into synthetic life, into rewriting the patterns of creation, and we call it advancement. We call it progress. But Enoch's story invites a different word, alignment, because advancement without alignment becomes danger, not because technology is evil, but because presence cannot be digitized. Revelation cannot be simulated. You cannot code your way into sacredness. And Enoch's life stands as the quiet, glowing contradiction to everything we think we must do to earn access to divine knowledge. He didn't manipulate. He didn't dominate. He didn't invent. He walked, and his walk opened the heavens. Not because he forced them, but because he became familiar to them. His name, they say, was known in the throne room. He did not need to knock. His steps were already in rhythm with the eternal. This is the central wound of the Watcher's fall. They were once trusted, once luminous, once aligned. But they crossed the boundary, not just physically, but vibrationally. They taught what should not have been taught. They gave what had not yet been earned, and it poisoned everything. They did not fall from the sky. They fell from resonance. Enoch rose because he was tuned, and that difference, more than anything else, is what must be understood, because we are once again a species teetering between two paths. On one side is ambition, a tower built from code and circuits, from neural implants and digitized dreams, rising not from the soil, but from the cloud. It does not rest. It does not reflect. It only builds. On the other side is intimacy, the quiet path, the walk, the life that slows to hear the sacred frequencies, to observe the divine patterns in silence. And that path asks nothing from the heavens. It only aligns with them. Enoch never demanded access. He became access. His life tuned itself to something holy. And when the moment came, the transition was seamless, because he had already crossed over long before his body did. We tend to view such stories as exceptional, as if Enoch was born different. But the text doesn't say that. It says he lived differently, that he chose to walk a certain way, that he chose presence over power, that he listened, and because of that, he saw what others couldn't. His visions weren't a reward, they were a byproduct, the fruit of resonance, the overflow of alignment. And the message hidden in that silence is this: anyone can walk the same path, anyone can become aligned, but few are willing to go slowly enough to match the rhythm, to stop climbing the tower and start circling the garden, to stop reaching through the sky and start returning to the walk, because the walk is uncomfortable. It is not quick. It does not impress the world, but it is the path that the heavens respond to. And if Enoch's story is rising again in this age, perhaps it is because the sacred is searching, listening for someone whose steps sound familiar, not to abduct, not to display, but to entrust, with vision, with wisdom, with access. The heavens are not closed. They are waiting for walkers, for witnesses, for Enochs. The veil, for most, is a mystery, thin in moments, impenetrable in others. We imagine it as a line drawn between worlds, a boundary keeping flesh from fire, time from eternity, spirit from form. But what if the veil is not a line, but a threshold of tone? What if it does not block us with strength, but with silence? Not because it cannot be crossed, but because we have forgotten how to resonate with it. Enoch's life suggests this very thing, that the veil is not a gate to be pushed open. It is a song to be harmonized with. And his walk, unbroken, unhurried, was the long tuning of his soul to the eternal pitch. He moved in rhythm with something holy, and eventually the boundary recognized him, not as intruder, but as kin. And so it opened, not with thunder, but with welcome, not with lightning, but with light. This is why his vanishing is recorded in so few words, because from the inside, it wasn't a vanishing, it was a homecoming. The earth simply let go of one who no longer belonged to it. He was not abducted, he had already arrived. And this is the haunting beauty of Enoch's story. It suggests that reality is layered, that time and space, as we know them, are only the first level, that above them, and sometimes beneath them, there are other realms, other timelines, other places that coexist with ours. The Book of Enoch describes these layers in stunning, almost surreal detail. Winds stored in rooms, stars moving through gates, trees with spirits, angels who govern snow and fire, thunder given speech. It is not myth, it is architecture, a blueprint of dimensions layered like a chord. And Enoch, because of his walk, was allowed to hear that chord, to step into it, to see how it holds. And it held him, not as a foreign body, but as one who had always belonged. His abduction then was not an interruption. It was the lifting of static. A body moved into its true frequency. We look to the skies today for signs of life, of God, of anything beyond the noise. But perhaps the reason we do not hear the sacred anymore is not because it is absent, but because we are off-key, because we vibrate too loudly with fear, with ego, with haste, and the veil, always listening, does not respond, because heaven opens only to those who are still enough to listen, still enough to hear, still enough to match its tone. Enoch was not given revelation. He became revelation. His walk was not toward mystery. It was the mystery. A daily journey that slowly peeled back the world until the eternal was all that remained. And this, perhaps, is the quiet tragedy of the Watchers. They were once of that same realm, attuned, luminous, trusted. But they broke the rhythm. They crossed into our world not in alignment, but in desire. And that crossing, though it opened the gate, created distortion. Their knowledge, real, potent, ancient, was given without calibration. It shook the world. It warped the order. And so the veil hardened again, not as punishment, but as protection, until another could be found, another who would not seek to use the secrets, but to understand them, who would not exploit, but steward. And Enoch was that one. He was not chosen because he was perfect. He was chosen because he was present, because his life had become a slow tuning, a gentle rehearsal of the sacred tone. And when it rang out, the heavens opened to receive him, not to remove him from the earth, but to place him where earth and heaven meet, in the song. And maybe that song still plays. Maybe even now, amid our noise, amid our striving, the tone still hums beneath all things, waiting, searching, listening for another walker. In every generation, there are those who seek the hidden things, who search scripture, sky, and science for the keys that unlock the veil. Some chase prophecy. Others peer through microscopes or read the movement of planets. There is hunger in the human spirit to understand, to see what lies beyond the ordinary. And yet, for all our seeking, the heavens remain quiet. The veil does not lift easily, not because it is cruel, but because it is sacred. And sacred things are not revealed to the unready. This is the quiet paradox of Enoch's life. He was one of the only men in history to walk into the divine without dying. Yet he never asked for that access. He didn't demand it. He didn't manipulate reality to gain entrance. He simply lived in alignment until heaven called him home. And this alignment was not passive. It was cultivated, a posture, a lifestyle, a refusal to be distracted. Enoch lived during a time of growing darkness. The world was shifting. The watchers were stirring. Knowledge was leaking into humanity like a slow poison, wrapped in beauty, cloaked in brilliance. Enoch saw it. He heard the warnings. And instead of joining the rush to power, he withdrew. He walked. He listened. He received dreams and visions. But he carried them with reverence, not ambition. And that reverence changed everything. Because to heaven, reverence is currency. It is the weight that proves we can be trusted with what is holy. The watchers had knowledge, but no reverence, and their fall split the world open. But Enoch, he had reverence first, and when knowledge came, he held it gently, with silence, with sorrow, with love. This is why his visions still echo, because they were not born from curiosity, but from devotion. And heaven responds to devotion. We live in a time when the mysteries are rising again. The ancient knowledge, the sciences once hidden, the technologies that once lived only in myth, are returning. We build machines that learn. We speak in code. We decode the genome. We stretch toward the stars. And all of it echoes the ambition of the pre-flood world, the age of Enoch, the age of watchers, the age of towers. We are, once again, on the threshold. And the question is not whether we will cross it, but how. Will we rush through driven by hunger, or will we walk slowly, tuned to the divine, ready to be entrusted with what lies beyond? Enoch's story is a map, but not the kind we're used to. It doesn't mark coordinates, it marks character. It charts the interior terrain of the soul. His journey was inward before it was upward. His transformation was unseen before it became cosmic. And this is what we must remember. The veil does not respond to the intellect. It responds to intimacy, to presence, to the quiet consistency of a life lived near the heart of God. We can know every ancient text, every coded manuscript, every theory of heaven's architecture, and still remain blind. Because access is not granted through knowledge. It is granted through surrender. And Enoch surrendered. His entire life was a yes, a daily ascent to the sacred. And that yes, repeated over years, became a sound that the heavens could not ignore. So they opened and took him, not as an experiment, but as a son, as a scribe, as a bridge between worlds. And now, as the veil trembles again, his footsteps call to us, not to build towers, not to ascend by force, but to walk, slowly, reverently, in rhythm with the one who still holds the gate. To be taken by God is not merely to vanish, it is to be entrusted. Enoch was not stolen from earth, he was summoned. His life had become so in tune with the sacred pulse that heaven did not just notice, it responded. And that response was not spectacle, it was assignment. Because when God takes someone, he does not just remove them, he repositions them. And the space they enter is not an escape, it is a role, a responsibility. Enoch's disappearance, brief though it may appear in the text, was the threshold to a far greater task. He was not just the one who walked with God. He became the one who carried God's voice into realms where even angels trembled. When the fallen watchers cried out from their prison, they cried to Enoch, not because he had authority, but because he had access, because heaven had chosen him as the messenger, the scribe, the intermediary, the one who had been trusted with the design of stars, the judgments of angels, the secrets of time. And that trust came not from strength, but from stillness, from the life he had already lived. Enoch had no army, no lineage of kings, no monument. He simply walked. And the fruit of that walk was not just favor, it was gravity. Heaven could place weight in him, and he would carry it. We long for that kind of influence now, to be carriers of meaning, messengers of insight, voices that speak not from ego, but from the eternal. But few are willing to live the kind of life that can bear that weight. We chase platforms instead of presence. We measure reach, but not resonance. We speak often, but do not walk long. And the heavens do not respond to noise. They respond to fidelity, to lives that are shaped slowly, in private, in silence, in surrender. Enoch's story is proof that the unseen life is the most powerful, that what we cultivate in hiddenness will one day become the bridge between realms. Because God does not need more performers. He needs witnesses, carriers, friends. And Enoch had become a friend, not in a casual sense, but in the ancient, covenantal way. He had walked near the heart of the Creator long enough that their rhythms matched. And in that closeness, God could entrust him with the words that would shape angels, with the visions that would reveal the true architecture of existence, with the secrets of time itself. And when the watchers cried out, God sent Enoch, not to condemn, not to pity, but to speak with clarity, to remind them of their choices, their descent, their broken alignment, and perhaps, in doing so, to remind humanity what happens when we misuse what we've been given. We are living in days that echo Enoch's. Knowledge is expanding. Borders between physical and digital blur. Ethics strain under the pressure of innovation. And somewhere behind it all, the veil waits, listening, watching, searching, for another life like Enoch's, a life heaven can trust, a soul who does not seek the mysteries to possess them, but to steward them, to carry them with awe, with reverence, with tears, because heaven does not give revelation lightly. It gives it to those who will guard it, speak it, and disappear if necessary. Enoch did all three, and because of that, he remains, not just in the past, but in the silence between our days. A signal, a possibility, a map still waiting to be walked. The watchers came down because they saw beauty and wanted it. Their descent was not accidental. It was choice, a turning of divine presence toward desire, and that turning split the heavens. Because they did not descend with permission. They descended with hunger. They brought knowledge, but knowledge detached from reverence becomes poison. They brought teachings, but truth without timing becomes chaos. They gave secrets not to heal but to control. And the world, once seeded with purity, began to bend. Weapons were made, spirits were summoned, powers were accessed, and humanity, so quick to receive and slow to discern, took what was given, not knowing it would cost them the world. It was the beginning of the end, and standing within that unraveling was Enoch, alone, watching, listening, refusing. While others grabbed at power, Enoch withdrew into silence. While giants were born and empires began to stretch toward the sky, he walked, quietly, with God. He did not chase knowledge. He prepared to carry it. And that preparation made him the one voice heaven could trust in the flood of noise. It is hard to overstate the courage of such a choice, to resist the allure of the forbidden, to hold your own soul steady while the earth tips toward madness. But Enoch did, and for that reason he was lifted, not as an escape, but as a contrast, a signal, a rebuke to those who believed access must be taken. Because Enoch's life showed it could be given, and given freely, if the soul was ready. this pattern of ambition corrupting the sacred repeats. We see it now in 1,000 forms, in artificial creation, in data-driven intimacy, in technologies that promise transcendence without transformation. The Watchers descend again, not with wings, but with code, with upgrades, with glittering answers to our deepest fears. And we, once again, reach for what has not been earned. And once again, the world bends. But in the background, the path of Enoch still hums, still calls, still waits. A narrow path, unseen, uncelebrated, but alive. And those who walk it do so not for power, but for presence. Not for display, but for devotion. They seek no audience, only alignment. And to such ones, the veil still softens, the gates still open, heaven still speaks. Because heaven is not impressed with brilliance, it is drawn to faithfulness, to those who can carry the weight of wonder without becoming arrogant, to those who can be shown the sacred and still bow low. Enoch was one such man. The Watchers fell because they reached before they were ready. Enoch rose because he waited until he was called. And that is the lesson hidden in the silence of his story. You do not need to reach. You need only to walk, to become the kind of soul the heavens recognize. And when that happens, when your life sings in tune with the sacred, God will not hesitate. The veil will lift, and you will see. What does it mean to become transparent to heaven? Not invisible, but translucent. A soul so clear, so refined, so free of distortion that divine light passes through without resistance. Enoch became such a soul. His life did not vanish, it was clarified. The impurities of noise, ambition, fear, and self dissolved across years of walking with God, until the veil itself no longer knew where he ended and the eternal began. And in that moment of ultimate resonance, the earth released him. Not with grief, but with agreement, because he no longer belonged to its weight. He had become light, not just in brightness, but in burden. And lightness, real lightness, is rare. We live in an age swollen with noise. Our identities are curated, edited, magnified. We carry the weight of opinions, projections, fears. But Enoch carried none of it. He walked in the quiet. He left no monuments, no grand declarations, no kingdoms. But his life was watched by heaven. And that watching was not passive. It was preparation. Because when a soul becomes clean enough, still enough, aligned enough, heaven takes notice. It leans in. It draws near. Because transparency to heaven is not about escape. It's about transformation. Enoch did not leave the world because it was evil. He was lifted because he no longer needed the density of it. He had become attuned to a different gravity, a finer one that pulls not from below, but from above. We often imagine spiritual experiences as interruptions, moments of brilliance breaking through the fog of daily life. But for Enoch, the experience was his life. There was no separation. His daily walk and his celestial journey were one rhythm, one song. He did not enter visions like dreams. He lived within them. His reality was layered, and he moved through those layers not by accident, but by preparation, by consent, by presence. And when the time came, heaven did not need to break in. It only needed to lift, because the bridge had already been built. We crave access like this now. We hunger for the mystical, the transcendent, the beyond. But the access Enoch had cannot be replicated through ritual or revelation. It can only be inherited through rhythm, through life, through day after day of walking in the same direction. Not perfectly, not forcefully, but faithfully. And this is why Enoch's story endures. It does not appeal to the dramatic. It appeals to the devoted. He was not taken by force. He was received in love, because heaven recognized him, not as a visitor, but as family. And that invitation still stands, to become a soul so attuned to the sacred that when the veil parts, you don't flinch, you simply keep walking, as if the heavens were the next step all along. There are whispers, ancient, trembling whispers, that Enoch never truly left, that his walk did not end at heaven's gate but continued, deeper, further, that the man who once walked beneath stars now walks among them, that his steps echo through the higher realms, not as memory, but as motion. In Jewish mysticism, he is called Metatron, the scribe of God, the voice behind the veil, the keeper of divine measure, a being who once was man, and yet now radiates with a voice like thunder and a presence so vast angels bow low. Is it possible that Enoch, mortal Enoch, became something more? Not through ambition, not through rebellion, but through alignment so perfect, so seamless, that heaven absorbed him. If this is true, then his abduction was not a conclusion. It was a promotion, a reformation of form. A soul made so translucent, so stable, so trusted, that it was folded into the very architecture of the divine. This is more than theology, it is blueprint, because it means a human life can become so attuned to God that it transcends the old definitions, not through escape, but through full participation, through surrender, through sacred rhythm. Enoch did not grasp at eternity, he became a steward of it, and in doing so, his humanity was not erased, it was expanded. We are conditioned to think that to become more divine, we must become less human. But Enoch shows us the opposite, that when humanity walks in harmony with its source, it doesn't vanish, it shines, it deepens, it becomes a vessel for heaven itself. And so, if Metatron is truly Enoch, then we must ask, what is he doing now? The texts speak of books, books of life, of judgment, of memory, records of human stories, angelic deeds, celestial alignments, and Metatron is said to be their keeper, the scribe, the archivist of eternity, a witness not just to what was, but to what is unfolding. Could it be that Enoch, the man who walked with God, now walks within the divine administration, that he writes as we breathe, that the same feet that touched ancient soil now move through heavenly courts, recording our hours, marking the moments when we turn our faces to the light? If this is true, then Enoch's transformation is not just a tale of wonder. It is a story of proximity. He was not taken far away. He was brought closer into the sacred mechanics of reality, into the blueprint of all things. And in that space he does not rule. He remembers, he records, he watches, because a witness does not speak for himself. He speaks for what he sees. And Enoch sees everything now, not as a god, but as one who was willing to walk slowly enough to be entrusted with the scroll. This changes how we see destiny. It reminds us that proximity to God does not inflate the ego, it dissolves it. That divine calling is not loud, it is exact. It arrives to the one who is quiet enough to hear it and strong enough to carry it. And Enoch was both. That is why he was not merely shown the mysteries, he became part of them, woven into the fabric of the unseen, alive, active, remembering. We often look at Enoch's story and assume it belongs to another time, another kind of man, a figure draped in myth, so distant in purity and purpose that all we can do is admire him from afar. But the story does not exist to dazzle. It exists to invite, because if Enoch could walk with God in the age of giants and violence, of fallen angels and corrupted knowledge, then so can we. His era was no cleaner than ours. In fact, it was darker. The heavens were stirring with rebellion. The earth groaned under the weight of unnatural alliances. The very boundaries of creation were being stretched by those who should have known better. And yet, In that chaos, one man chose stillness, chose fidelity, chose presence. He did not build a following. He did not build a brand. He built a rhythm, a sacred walk that deepened with every step. And it was that walk that caught heaven's attention, that pulled eternity near. This is the invitation still resting at our feet. The veil has not closed. The rhythm has not died. The path has not disappeared. It is simply quiet. And that is why so few find it, because we are trained to chase what is loud, what sparkles, what moves fast. But Enoch's path is slow, gentle, invisible to most. It requires us to leave the parade and return to the garden, to trade noise for nuance, striving for surrender. And in that exchange, something happens. The veil begins to thin, not because we push it, but because it recognizes us. The soul tuned to heaven is not kept out. It is drawn in, because God has always looked for friends, not crowds, not servants who obey out of fear, friends who know his rhythm, who walk his garden in the cool of day. Enoch became that kind of friend, and in doing so, he reminded us that the divine is not far. It is just quiet, waiting, listening, watching, for the sound of footsteps that match its own. We do not need to ascend mountains or decode prophecy to meet God. We need only to walk, consistently, humbly, willing to become smaller so something sacred can grow inside. The world teaches us to be seen, but the kingdom watches those who are hidden. The world rewards noise, but heaven waits for melody. And Enoch sang the melody of the old world, the one before the fall, before ambition, before ego. His life hummed with that original sound, and when it reached heaven's ears, the veil lifted, not in punishment, but in welcome. And the same can still happen. The same walk is still offered, not to escape the earth, but to become a bridge between it and heaven, to carry the weight of wonder, to write with light, to be trusted with the kind of truth that can't be spoken, only walked. Enoch did not vanish, he became. And we can too. We are always becoming something. With each choice, each thought, each silence or distraction, we are shaping the vessel that carries our soul. The question is not whether we're changing. The question is, into what? Enoch's life whispers the possibility of becoming a vessel that heaven can fill without spilling. His walk did not make him perfect. It made him prepared. Prepared to hold mystery without profaning it. Prepared to carry vision without demanding credit. Prepared to step across the veil not as a trespasser, but as one the veil welcomed. And this readiness did not happen in a moment. It happened in the quiet accumulation of thousands of invisible decisions, to listen instead of speak, to observe instead of dominate, to walk instead of run. He became a vessel by emptying himself, not of personality, but of pretense, not of identity, but of interference. So when the divine came close, there was space, there was clarity, there was resonance. Heaven does not fill what is already full. It fills what has been made ready. And Enoch, in every moment of his hidden life, made himself ready. That is the secret many overlook. His story is not about a man taken. It's about a man prepared. A man who became sacred architecture, a bridge, a vault, a scroll written in flesh. His ascent was not a prize. It was a continuation. The next natural step for one who had walked so closely with God that his breath had already begun to match eternity's rhythm. He had not just visited heaven in dreams, he had begun to dwell in its atmosphere. And when you dwell long enough in that light, your form changes. You do not shimmer outwardly. You settle inwardly, into stillness, into weight. And heaven responds to weight. Not the weight of ego or accomplishment, but of character, of humility, of faithfulness hidden from applause. We are not called to shine. We are called to hold, to carry, to become vessels through which heaven can reveal itself. But this kind of vessel is not built quickly. It is shaped in the slow hours, in the decisions no one sees, in the prayers whispered in rooms no one enters, in the moments when we choose alignment over ambition, stillness over strategy. That is where the vessel forms. That is where the song of Enoch still plays. It is not a loud melody. It is barely audible beneath the noise of our age. But for those who slow down, who soften, who choose depth over display, the melody begins to rise, and with it, the invitation, not to be taken, but to become, to carry, to walk. And perhaps, if we do so long enough, the veil may lift, and the vessel we've become will be ready for the light that waits to fill it. Perhaps Enoch never truly left. Perhaps his story does not end with absence, but with nearness of a different kind, one not bound by space or history but by presence. We imagine ascension as separation, but what if, in Enoch's case, it was integration? A folding of dimensions, where the man who once walked the earth now walks alongside it, through it, beyond it, not as a ghost, but as a guardian. The book of Enoch tells us he became the scribe of heaven, Metatron, clothed in light, seated beside the throne. But a throne is not just for ruling, it is for watching. And the watcher Enoch became is not like those who fell, but one who rose, one who did not break the boundary between heaven and earth, but became its steward. We do not know where he is, but maybe we feel him, on quiet mornings when the veil thins, when we suddenly remember to walk instead of run, when we hear the invitation to step into rhythm rather than chaos. Maybe in those moments, the frequency of Enoch returns, not his voice, but his pattern, his weight, his walk. We long for mentors in the sacred, for those who have gone before and shown what is possible when a life is tuned not to culture, but to the Creator. Enoch is that mentor, not flashy, not verbose, but present. And in this age, presence is rebellion. The watchers came down to indulge. Enoch went up to intercede. That is the difference. One movement was born of hunger, the other of holiness. And now perhaps he watches still, not in surveillance, but in intercession, a companion to our own slow walk, a reminder that the veil lifts not with noise but with trust, that ascension is not an escape, but an expansion of capacity. We are not called to leave the world behind. We are called to carry heaven into it, to become vessels like Enoch, scribes of the sacred. And the first step to becoming such a vessel is not knowledge. It is surrender, not vision. It is rhythm, the willingness to walk, to trust, to hold mystery without reaching for control. Enoch lived this, and now his life pulses beneath the surface of ours, waiting to be echoed. Heaven did not take him to make him a mystery. It took him to make him a mirror, so we might see what is possible when a human life becomes fully aligned with the eternal. And perhaps that is his greatest gift. Not the visions, not the ascension, not the fire, but the walk itself. A pattern that has not faded, a pulse still beating, a presence not gone, but waiting. And so we arrive at the edge of the story, but not its end. Because stories like Enoch's do not conclude. They echo. They resurface when the world begins to spin too fast, when souls become untethered from silence, when the hunger for truth burns hotter than the desire to be seen. In times like these, the rhythm of Enoch stirs again. A man who was not swallowed by mystery, but shaped by it, who did not demand revelation, but became still enough to carry it, who did not use his walk to ascend, but allowed his walk to make him ready should heaven choose to descend. Enoch's life remains a quiet defiance of all that tempts us toward noise. He reminds us that access to the divine was never about conquest. It has always been about alignment. He was not taken because he built something tall, but because he became something deep. There are no blueprints left behind, no artifacts, no inscriptions chiseled into stone, only the weight of a life lived in consistent rhythm with God. And that rhythm still pulses, low, sacred, constant, calling to those who have ears to hear, not in the thunder, not in the fire, but in the whisper. And what does that whisper say? It says walk, just walk. It says slow down. It says trust the silence, trust the questions. Let them make you soft. Let them draw you inward. Let them peel away the noise of needing to prove. Because Enoch proved nothing. He simply lived in tune with something higher, older, truer. And that is what made him a vessel for the eternal. We often ask whether Enoch was abducted, whether he was taken like Elijah in a whirlwind, or like some being of light caught up into alien realms. But perhaps that's the wrong question. Perhaps the better one is, what did he become before he was taken? Because the answer to that changes everything. It shifts the mystery from spectacle to formation, from what happened to him to who he chose to be. And if Enoch's path is a mirror, then it reflects not only what is possible, but what is invited. There is no barrier keeping us from becoming a soul like his. Only pace, only posture, only the willingness to let wonder replace ambition, to let longing replace knowledge, to let devotion become our direction. Enoch's path is not the path of the loud, it is the way of the hidden, and to find it, we must become quiet enough to hear it again, in the wind, in the early morning stillness, in the part of your soul that never stopped looking for the garden. That's where it begins, one step, then another, until the veil begins to feel more like a door, and you realize you've been walking toward it your whole life, not to be taken, but to be known, to be trusted, to become a vessel of the sacred once again, like Enoch.